Good afternoon and welcome to the Economia Budget Analysis webinar. I'm Richard Cree, the editor of Economia, and with me in the studio this afternoon to discuss the implications of today's budget are Danielle Stewart, partner at Baker Tilly, Gordon Skaliak, director of commercial credit reference agency Graydon UK, and Sarah Buckley, public affairs manager at ICAEW. Thank you all very much for coming in this afternoon. We're also keen to get your input to today's debate, and if you're watching live, you can email questions to economia@icaew.com. The focus of today's conversation is the impact of the budget on medium-sized businesses, which is a campaign we've been supporting in Economia since launch around the squeeze middle. Before we get to discuss that, let's start with a look at the standout announcements, I guess, from today's budget. Danielle, on balance, has this been a good budget for business, do you think?
Oh, definitely a good budget for business. Yes, we were trawling through the detail, trying to find anything bad for business, and it was really quite difficult. With a cut in the main rate of corporation tax, some lovely reliefs around R&D tax credits and film credits and so on. Lots of good news in there.
Gordon, is this the sort of budget that you were hoping for and that your clients were looking forward to?
Yes, it's very much as it was expected. There are some new measures like a national loan guarantee scheme that will provide additional finance to small to medium businesses, as well as some other forms of finance, non-bank lending forms. And that will also go down well, I think, with most of the businesses that are looking for finance. Obviously, there are some other measures that will need to be taken for that to be communicated to those businesses so that everybody can take advantage of it.
Yeah. And Sarah, is this what ICAEW was looking for in the budget?
I think there was a lot of good news in there. Certainly the corporation tax cut is the main piece of good news for business, and that will be well received. We'd also like to have seen slightly more on simplification of the whole tax system rather than simply the changing of the rates, though of course that is great news both for business and for the UK's competitiveness internationally.
I guess economic recovery depends on business growth. That in turn depends on confidence. Do you get a sense that this budget will do enough to restore confidence, Gordon?
It will go a long way to restoring confidence. However, I think there will be lots of skepticism as some of these measures are relatively new and yet to be tried out. Extending new forms of finance and making that finance cheaper or making that access to finance for small to medium businesses easier is one thing. But we should not forget also that the confidence should also come from a trade between those businesses. Unless they're confident to extend credit to each other, they will still look for the ways to obviously grow and achieve sustainable growth. There are other ways, of course, to encourage businesses to look for that finance and for that confidence. And that will include also the measures that have been discussed to make businesses themselves more responsible for boosting their own credit profile before they seek finance.
Right. Danielle, is a confidence boosting budget, do you think?
I think on balance it probably should be. Confidence is an ephemeral thing, isn't it? You never really know whether the fact that people might have more money in their pocket to spend will help right from the bottom. I mean, we're talking about medium-sized businesses, but it all starts with the consumers, really, doesn't it? I think the thing that's most exciting to me is I can see inward investment being seriously encouraged by this budget. Certainly at Baker Tilly we see a lot of activity from people coming from, anywhere from Russia, China, all over the world, Australia, coming to set up business here. The Olympics has been very helpful to that. Right. And I think that the moves to reduce the rates of corporation tax, increase the reliefs and allowances, enterprise zones, he's increased the capital allowances in enterprise zones, etc., should all encourage foreign businesses to come back to the UK or to come to the UK for the first time. So that hopefully, combined with a bit of activity at the bottom end, should improve confidence.
Yeah. Sarah, do you think this will boost growth ultimately?
I think we'll have to wait and see. The first thing to say is that a lot of the measures in the budget, probably aside from the corporation tax cut, are things that might take quite a long time to play out on the ground. So the credit easing and national loan guarantee scheme policies all sound fantastic, but businesses can't really go to the bank and expect a wad of cash tomorrow. They're going to take a year or two to come into effect. The other thing to say about business confidence is that another great measure, aside from inward investment, is what investment businesses are actually making themselves. At the moment, we think they're holding around £60 billion worth of cash on their balance sheets to guard against possible risks, such as another worsening of the Eurozone crisis. And I think until they start investing that money, that's a key driver of economic growth that just isn't going into the economy. So when that starts to happen, I think we can say that this budget has boosted confidence.
You mentioned the corporation tax drop. Do you think that is more likely to have an impact on the economy and on growth than the 50p to 45p? I mean, which of those two would you highlight as a key measure?
In my view, I would say the corporation tax would be more consequential, because the personal tax rate reducing is good news, especially for people that earn a lot of money, but of itself wouldn't necessarily lead to growth or increased economic activity. Might lead to a little bit less tax. One doesn't want to say avoidance, but you know what I mean, tax structuring, shall we say. Whereas that corporation tax rate coming down, I mean, anyway, it was due to come down 1%, and now it's coming down 2%,
Yeah.
and we're still going to keep the further 1% drop over the next 2 years. You end up with a corporation tax rate which has to be one of the lowest in the Western world. I haven't done my research, but just looking at how low it is. So you think if you're a company, you can shelter your profits within the company, not pay them out to people, and reinvest that money. You're getting an awful lot of the money that you make back into the business. And that must surely fund future growth.
Yeah. One of the other factors that was mentioned was the infrastructure. There's a lot about infrastructure in this budget. Is that, Sarah, is that something that you're aware of as people wanting to see, and is it something that you think will have a positive impact? You know, spending on broadband and various other areas.
I think those kinds of factors can certainly help business growth. Around the infrastructure point, obviously the question is always, where is the money going to come from for this? And the government doesn't have an enormous amount of money to plough into infrastructure like some of the emerging markets do. So what they're going to have to do is look to the private sector for that kind of investment. And the Chancellor is considering taking money from, well, not taking money, but encouraging investment from pension funds to do that. But of course, you also want to see that money going in to stimulate the corporate sector and provide finance and liquidity for our businesses. So there's a lot of demands on that cash. But it's certainly true that the UK needs to improve its infrastructure to compete internationally. And we saw recognition of that in the speech today.
Is that something you'd agree with, Gordon? Is that?
Yes, any investment in obviously transport links and infrastructure, including broadband, should make Britain more competitive. And there were some noises even before the budget that that's exactly one of the areas where investment is needed to catch up with some most competitive economies in Europe. Especially, I think the angle is that investment stays in Britain, or most of it would stay in Britain, one would expect. Therefore, it should also boost all sorts of businesses that are involved in that work.
Daniel, we hear quite a lot from business about the fact that they'd quite like, I mean, the best thing the government can do is get out of the way, is a kind of key phrase from business. And yet this, in a sense, there's quite a lot of intervention in this budget, would you say? I mean, certainly around infrastructure and that sort of stuff. Is it good intervention?
I hadn't perceived it that way. It's interesting that you do. I felt it was less nanny state and more kind of helpful government.
So it's good
was the way that I read it. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it from that perspective. I mean, I'm involved at the moment with BIS as a red tape reduction champion for what that means, and I'm delighted to say that I've actually seen some real desire to reduce regulation for businesses, more real than I've ever seen in all the years I've been reducing regulation, which I have been. And they talked about planning regulations, for example, and sweeping away the planning regulations and replacing it with something very small. I think they said it was going to be the biggest reduction in regulation like ever. I can believe that. You know, it's the kind of thing you think might just be rhetoric. But what I've seen from Biz, the desire for change is real. And we're pushing Europe to help us, because a lot of the regulation that we are drowning in business comes from Europe. So, yeah, I think they're trying to help. I really do.
Gordon, is there a sense from you that the medium-sized businesses are getting the support and the help they need, and that it's heading in the right direction?
Yeah, I think they're definitely getting some support, but I would pick up just a little bit on the regulation topic, which I think there are also lots of good noises in deregulation and trying to make it easier for small to medium businesses to operate. But from the point of, again, credit and risk and small business or medium business access to finance, I think we need to be just a bit mindful about deregulation in the respect that it can reduce some of the financial transparency or financial reporting that is necessary for businesses to make business decisions and again, credit assessment. In particular, I'm referring to a couple of discussion papers that have been discussed recently. Like for example, simpler reporting for small businesses is still very controversial, and I think the government should really look into that as more in lines of smarter reporting rather than simpler reporting. To keep all these businesses involved and really the accessible information for that business decision making.
Yeah. May I pick up on
Yes,
something
of course.
you said there? Of course, one of the announcements today was the cash reporting for businesses below the VAT threshold, which was one of the things that was suggested in simpler reporting for the smallest businesses. Now, I have to say, I think cash reporting for businesses that small, which are almost, should we say, slave companies, and where it's an individual operating as a self-employed person, fair enough for them to just report on a cash basis. Yep. But I very much agree with what you're saying when you go a little bit up the scale to anything that is a proper business with employees, possibly with stock, debtors and creditors. The idea of having simpler reporting, which is somehow based on cash, is completely wrong, because then they would be looking at the wrong figures for profit and not really understanding what they're doing. And you could end up with them taking credit that they shouldn't have been taking, or not being able to take credit at all, and actually you end up with disaster. Right, so I wouldn't like to see that move up the
so it needs
scale.
To stay where it is.
Yeah, at the level it's at, I think it's fair enough.
Sarah, you have a...
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, there are obviously several processes going on at the moment, firstly around this cash accounting proposal and also around audit thresholds. And I think while it's really important to scale back the regulatory burdens on business, we do need to remember that businesses need some form of assurance if they're to get bank finance, and perhaps at the moment, more importantly, the non-bank finance that we've heard a lot about in the Breeden Review last week. And they need that kind of third-party advocacy, financially speaking, if they're to make sure that they can secure that finance. That this cash accounting proposal and the audit threshold proposals need to be carefully scrutinised to make sure that we don't lose that.
Okay. We talked a bit about access to finance there. Today there was an announcement of or confirming, I suppose, of the business finance partnership targeted specifically at medium-sized firms, and the involvement of private sector funds to kind of complement that. Is that something that you would support and agree, and you're pleased to see the expansion of that slightly, he mentioned? Who wants to? Sorry,
one can't not support it in concept, to give a very accountantish double negative. I think with all of these things, it's always seeing how it works out in practice, because I think if you talked about the small firm loan guarantee scheme or whatever it's now called, and what I find is every time there's a budget they always announce some wonderful new amount of funds that are going into it, and in real life when you apply for those funds you can never ever get them. I think in all the years these schemes have existed, I've managed to get 2 for clients, and I'm going back many years, and it's because the banks hate to do it. Even when they're owned by the state, they still hate to do it. So I think the same would apply to this £1 billion they were talking about putting into. I noticed it said mid-cap. My eye caught mid-cap,
yes.
Because of knowing we were going to be speaking about middle-sized companies today. Lovely if it happens, if it gets its way through. Fantastic. let's see, is all I would
Is
say.
it something, Gordon,
Let's
you
see.
think you think it will work?
Yeah,
Gordon?
I would agree. I think it's just compared to obviously the National Loan Guarantee Scheme. This is a small drop in the ocean, and we are yet to see. It sounds more like an experiment, and if it takes off, if it proves with some good results,
Fantastic.
I'm sure that the government will look into extending more money into that direction. Sounds like a good option, something to be considered. The more doors you have open to small to medium businesses that they can knock on and seek that finance, it's the good thing. However, again, we need to go back to a dilemma that businesses who were not able to access finance before this budget for all sorts of reasons, their credit standing, their credit history, or perhaps a lack of financial transparency that would enable others to look into the worthiness of their business case, will still be there. They'll still be there.
They're better off today.
That's
We've got some questions coming from viewers, as it were. So there's one that's just come from Stuart in Kent. He says the corporation tax for most of his clients has not changed from 20%. Glib statements about corporation tax reduction doesn't really help small business. Who wants to take that?
I'll take it, and I'll say, fair comment, sir, if you're talking about small businesses, but I think the focus of today was more the kind of medium-sized business,
Yeah.
and certainly if you are talking, your 6.5 million turnover and below, absolutely fair comment, can't argue with that. But there again, 20% is pretty low, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's quite good in itself, but it's not a further reduction.
I mean, I'd actually pick up on that if I could quickly and say that there's levels of tax and then there's the process around tax. For medium-sized businesses, that corporation tax cut was good news. For small businesses, I think they might actually be a little happier to see a change around the way the tax system operates. We were quite disappointed that the Chancellor didn't say anything about the service standards at HMRC, which are really a big problem for businesses and one of the things they complain about most in terms of the tax burden. It's not always about the levels, it's about the fact that they spend an hour on the phone to HMRC when they could be growing their business or employing someone else. So I think that the government needs to be mindful of that as well. We're working with HMRC to help, but it's a slow process and it needs to be tackled.
Oh, can I just go in their defence? I've been in the profession for a lot more years than I care to admit to, and honestly, they have got so much better over recent years. And I know some of the people who are working very hard to make it happen, and the training that they are putting the staff through. Yes, of course, you still get individuals who don't do what they should do, and things can go wrong. But I think on balance, the standard of response nowadays is so fast, you can't believe it compared to what it used to be. You could wait months to get a reply to a letter. Now you'll be surprised if you wait a week. And I think that is very noticeable.
There's another question, slightly political.
Disagree.
Interesting point. Slightly political question, this one, or totally political, but it's Mark from London asks, where's the Lib Dem influence in the budget? I don't know if anyone wants to take that.
I'm not going to. I don't want to be political. We're accountants, not politicians.
Well, I'll say I certainly think that raising the threshold of income tax to £10,000 is something that the Tories and the Lib Dems are going to be scrapping about to claim credit for it. Obviously, it's claimed as originally a Lib Dem policy. We saw a Conservative MP standing up at PMQs just before the budget to try and wrest back that credit, and it's going to be a big campaigning issue for both of them. So I'd say that's the one that the Lib Dems will try and lay the best claim to.
While avoiding the 50 to 45 credit. Anyway, there's another question from Andy in Hampshire, and he asks whether there's any thoughts as to what the government is trying to achieve with an ultra-long dated gilt. So these are the so-called Osborne bonds. And why would you want to buy into a yield that's as long as this? I don't know if anyone here has the expertise to...
I suppose they're trying to create confidence in the UK economy. Is the
It's
only thing I can think of. It's
for
like saying, look, Kate, we're going to be here, we're going to be doing good things for a long time to come. You can rely on us. That was how I read it. Not that I'm an expert in that, I have to say.
There's a question we're probably more comfortable with. A question from Lucy, doesn't say where she's from, but do the panel think that bringing corporation tax down towards the level paid by the lowest paid workers, i.e. I guess to 20%, will increase support for business that we need to boost recovery? That was quite a convoluted question, wasn't it?
I think we touched on that just a
Yeah.
little bit earlier. Obviously, it's going that way, of course, lowering it, makes it more competitive. But I think Britain is already in a fairly competitive place when it comes to corporation tax.
Is 20% a realistic target for corporation tax, do you think?
It's as low as it wants to go, I think. I wouldn't like to see we turn into a tax haven if it's any lower, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
You want to see that business is contributing to the UK. But I think the idea that you're retaining, nearly 80% of the money that you make in the company to be able to reinvest in employment, in infrastructure for the company, in capital, equipment and so on is quite exciting. And I think it gives us a chance to kind of rebuild what's gone wrong over the course of the recession.
And Sarah, you mentioned earlier about releasing those resources that companies have got in their cash reserves, etc. I presume if we're lowering tax to 20%, then there needs to be some mechanism in place to make sure those reserves are released.
I think the major variable there is whether or not businesses are confident enough to let go of that cash and spend it on something else. And maybe this budget will go some way into generating that kind of confidence, but fundamentally, unless you resolve some other problems, and that includes intractable things like the Eurozone crisis, then it's going to be difficult to let go of that. Having said that, we were quite hoping to see the Chancellor maintain the AIA at £100,000, but that was probably not going to happen. But having said that, confidence is the biggest variable, not necessarily a tax incentive.
I'll just briefly touch on some of the sector-specific announcements that were made. Danielle, I don't know what in terms of the Wallace and Gromit announcements.
The Wallace and Gromit announcement.
Yeah.
We were delighted to see that. I mean, we do work with quite a few clients in media, and sitting here now in Soho, I'm sure everyone will be pleased. I think they said they're extending film tax credits for animation, for high-end TV. I'm not sure exactly what they mean by that.
Downton Abbey, I
and
presume.
videos,
Yeah.
as well as film. And it's a very generous relief, and it's one that you have to jump through a few hoops to get it, I'll be honest, but it's well worth getting. So that was great, because otherwise we'd be losing some of our most creative people out of the country to other places where they do encourage by tax breaks the film and TV industry. So that was one good one. The other one I was very pleased with was research and development, because down in my office in Guildford, we've got the University of Surrey just down the road, and we see a lot of these university spin-out companies. R&D tax credits are massively helpful, especially in their early days when they're making losses, and you can get literally a cash refund from the government, even though you haven't actually paid tax in respect of that research and development expenditure. They're talking about extending it to an above-the-line relief. I know my tax experts back at the ranch know what that means. I think it's basically just that it comes before you arrive at your profit for tax, rather than being a tax adjustment.
Right.
That all sounds jolly positive.
Gordon, were you pleased to see the sector-specific stuff around aeronautics?
Well, being a film buff, of course, I'm very happy with that. But obviously that affects a few sectors. But we're really thinking about all businesses in the UK. I think I welcome the measures that look at the businesses, let's say below 77,000, tax relief that will help those businesses to survive and flourish and provide, maybe if that's kept over a longer term, we can see maybe some real effects.
I'm conscious that time's moving on. We've got another question from George in London. He says that SMEs represent almost 54% of jobs in the private sector, but there was very little of any concrete use announced to help small businesses grow. What would the panel like to have seen done? Sarah, do you want to?
I think on the SME front, you might have been right earlier in saying that this was more targeted at medium-sized businesses, and we've certainly had a lot of messaging from the government on that over the past few months and the past year. I think on the small business front, a lot of small businesses are often listening out for counter-regulatory measures. As we said earlier, there was that big announcement on planning, and I know that is a big problem for certain kinds of businesses, but small businesses are very frustrated by progress on deregulation. If you look at something like the one in, one out pledge that the government has had, of course, you get rid of one regulation, you get another one in. That's not deregulation. That's keeping the same level of regulation. But of course, that's not really for a budget announcement. The budget's about tax. That's about regulation. So I think small businesses, the difficulties they face are myriad and many, and it's tricky to address them all in a budget.
Red Tape Challenge is genuinely helping with that. I mean,
Right.
it's been going since April 2011, and many different areas of business have been looked at already. And I know there's been a genuine reduction in regulation as a result of it. So, you know, there is progress, albeit not as fast as we'd like and perhaps not as revolutionary as we'd like. It's going in the right direction, yeah.
So are there other specific measures that you would have liked to have seen to help small businesses?
To help small businesses. I suppose the thing that everybody fantasises about is the day when tax and national insurance will come together as one. Why on earth are we administering these as two regimes? And the Chancellor did mention that they are going to progress this. I know it's something that's been talked about a lot. I'd like to see it turn into some real action. So that would be the one I think that would help, because it's things that people actually have to do. They have to calculate all that stuff, and whether even if they delegate it to their accountants or buy a computer program, it's still more complexity, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
For no good reason.
Gordon, would you in particular?
Yes, I think we would have liked, I think like many other small to medium businesses, to have seen some measures that will tackle the culture of late payment. Cash flow is the lifeblood, as we all know, of all businesses now. And our recent research is just confirming the trend that's continuing over the last 3 or 4 years, that the late payments are endemic, and they are just taking more and more toll on the cash flow, especially of small to medium businesses. For example, smaller suppliers dealing with big customers, they get squeezed. The legislation that was there in 1998 and then reformed in 2002 is really making no help to small to medium businesses. Yet in our recent research, also, I have to say, Graydon have done this research every year, but we are also doing something now with FPB to support that. Late payment is a problem. Trade credit between businesses, in some estimates, amounts to almost 2.5 times the bank business lending in the UK. So we should not neglect the fact that it's creating a vicious circle. Late payments are creating a vicious circle. When legislation does not help, I think the government should look into the other measures, how to help businesses to create the culture of prompt payment rather than late payment.
Sure.
That's probably what we would have liked to see from the credit angle.
Okay. We are into the closing minutes. I wonder if you could each just quickly sort of sum up what the budget, what your top lines would be on the budget, I suppose. Sarah, do you want to kick off?
I would say it was a very positive sounding budget. We'd have liked to have seen a little bit more on tax simplification. A lot of it isn't really going to take effect for a little while, but having said that, we have a long-term and large problem to tackle, both of growth and of managing our debt and getting our debt levels down. And it's already been confirmed that we're not going to get rid of our deficit until after the next Parliament. A pretty sunny disposition for a budget today, but I think our problems are quite long-term, and we shouldn't get too optimistic about that too yet.
Spring rather than summer.
Exactly.
Gordon, what would you?
I agree with Sarah. Lots of the measures that were mentioned today will take effect over a long time. So it's not a short-term boost. It's not an aspirin for a headache. It's something that will take time, and it's very important that the government and all the institutions involved in channeling those measures to medium-sized businesses to actually communicate really effectively to those businesses how they can take advantage of those measures.
Danielle.
I suppose we're talking about the squeezed middle, and I think following today's announcements, that probably the squeezed middle are squeezed a little bit less hard than they were, and they should feel slightly happier than they did yesterday. And yes, it will play out over time, perhaps to be even easier still.
Fantastic. I think we are almost out of time. So thank you all very much for coming in this afternoon. Thanks Danielle Stewart, partner at Baker Tilly, Gordon Scaliac from Graydon UK, and Sarah Buckley from ICAW. You can find out more There's more budget analysis available on our website at icaw.com/economia. That's it really. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Cheers. Bye bye.